Welcome to Marple the Clue Crafter. I'm Landon Quill. Today, we're diving into a classic Agatha Christie-style mystery featuring the incomparable Miss Jane Marple. Settle in with a cup of tea, because this is a long one. Over 90 minutes of slow, deliberate storytelling to help you relax and unwind. Our tale is titled Corpse Found in Florence Garden, a Miss Marple death mystery. It's set in the 1920s at Florence Hall, a sprawling country estate in the English countryside, where secrets bloom like the roses in its famed garden. Chapter 1. Introduction and Setup. In the soft golden light of a 1920s English summer, Florence Hall stood like a jewel cradled in the rolling hills of Wiltshire. The estate was a vision of Georgian splendor, its red brick facade draped in ivy that whispered secrets with every breeze. Its gardens, famed throughout the county, were a masterpiece. Acres of emerald lawns, vibrant flower beds bursting with roses, lilies, and delphiniums, and a central fountain whose gentle gurgle seemed to carry the weight of untold stories. Hedges trimmed to geometric precision, framed winding paths that invited leisurely strolls, while ancient oaks stood sentinel, their branches heavy with the wisdom of centuries. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and freshly turned earth, a perfume that masked the undercurrents of discord brewing within the hall's walls. At the heart of this grandeur was Sir Reginald Harrington, a man whose wealth was matched only by his formidable presence. At 55, he was tall and broad-shouldered, with a mustache that curled like the edges of his temper. His deep-set eyes, sharp as flint, missed little, and his voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to command. Born into privilege, Sir Reginald had inherited Florence Hall from his father, a baronet whose prudent investments in railways had laid the foundation for the family's fortune. Reginald, however, had multiplied that wealth through shrewd ventures in colonial trade, spices, silks, and tea from the far reaches of the empire. His successor, Harrington, Sir Reginald's nephew and presumptive heir, was a young man of 28 whose charm was as polished as the sports cars he loved to race. With a degree in literature from Oxford, Arthur possessed a quick wit and a smile that disarmed even the sternest matrons. Yet beneath his easy manner lay a restless discontent. Sir Reginald, who valued discipline above all, saw Arthur's penchant for gambling, late nights, and fleeting romances as a betrayal of the Harrington name. Their arguments were the stuff of legend at Florence Hall, with Sir Reginald's booming threats to cut Arthur from the will echoing through the oak-paneled halls. "You'll not squander my legacy on cards and women," he'd roared at a recent dinner, to which Arthur had replied with a smirk. "Then perhaps I'll earn my own, uncle." The glint in his eye suggested he had plans, though whether they were honorable remained to be seen. Mr. Victor Lang, Sir Reginald's business partner, was a man of precision and restraint. At 47, his sharp features and neatly combed hair gave him the air of a ledger come to life. A German émigré who had anglicized his name, Lang had joined forces with Sir Reginald a decade prior, their partnership in importing exotic spices yielding handsome profits. But recent months had seen cracks form. Discrepancies in the ledgers, missing sums, unexplained expenses, had sparked heated disputes. Lang's visits to Florence Hall, once cordial, now carried the weight of unspoken accusations. His meticulous nature clashed with Sir Reginald's cavalier approach to business, and the tension between them was palpable, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The household staff added their own threads to the estate's intricate tapestry, Thomas Greeley, the head gardener, was a man of 53 whose weathered hands and broad shoulders spoke of a lifetime spent coaxing life from the soil. His pride in Florence Hall's gardens was unmatched, but so was his bitterness. Sir Reginald had recently accused him of pilfering rare tulip bulbs, a charge Greeley vehemently denied. "Planted 'em meself I did, and he calls me a guest at the Hall. His presence a nod to their shared youth in the Indian colonies." At 60, the colonel was burly and boisterous, his laughter filling rooms like cannon fire. Yet beneath his jovial exterior simmered an old wound. Decades ago, a high-stakes poker game in Bombay had ended in a bitter dispute, with Sir Reginald accused of cheating Blake out of a small fortune. The colonel dismissed it publicly as youthful folly, but his toasts at dinner carried a barbed edge, and his eyes lingered on Sir Reginald with something darker than nostalgia. Into this simmering cauldron of motives and grievances stepped Miss Jane Marple, an elderly spinster from the village of St. Mary Mead, some 10 miles distant. With her fluffy white hair, simple woolen cardigan, and ever-present knitting bag, Miss Marple was the picture of unassuming gentility. Her blue eyes, deceptively mild, missed nothing, and her mind, sharpened by years of observing village life, could unravel the most tangled of human knots. Lady Evelyn had invited her for a weekend at Florence Hall, citing their shared work on a charitable committee for war widows. "A quiet stay, Jane," she'd written. "The gardens will do you good." Miss Marple, ever fond of a puzzle, had accepted with a polite smile, suspecting the visit might offer more than floral delights. The weekend promised festivity. Sir Reginald had planned a grand garden party to showcase his prized roses and perhaps to flaunt his wealth. Invitations had gone out to local gentry, and the estate buzzed with preparations. Servants polished silver, gardeners trimmed hedges to perfection, and the kitchen churned out delicacies, scones, cucumber sandwiches, and lemon tarts that would tempt even the most jaded palate. The string quartet, hired from London, tuned their instruments in the conservatory, their notes drifting through open windows. As Friday evening approached, guests began to arrive. Motor cars purred up the gravel drive, their headlights cutting through the dusk. The train from London brought others, including Mr. Lang, who she sensed a discord beneath the harmony. A note out of tune, like a shadow flitting across a sunlit lawn. The garden party began at dusk, with guests in evening attire drifting through the paths. Sir Reginald held court near the fountain, his laughter booming as he toasted the company. "To Florence Hall, may its gardens bloom eternal." Glasses clinked, but Miss Marple, seated on a wrought iron bench, noted the undercurrents. Lady Evelyn's forced smile, Arthur's sly glance at Eliza, Lang's stiff posture, Greeley's absence from the festivities, and Blake's hand lingering too long on his glass. The quartet played on, but the air held a chill that no lantern could dispel. As the moon rose, painting the garden in silver, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to her village. People are much the same everywhere, she reflected. Pride, greed, love, and secrets. They bloom in gardens as surely as roses. Little did she know that by morning, one of those secrets would lie dead in the fountain, its waters stained with blood. Chapter 2. Arrival at Florence Hall. The train from London to Wiltshire chugged through the countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the golden fields slipping past the windows. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a cushioned compartment, gazed out at the hedgerows dotted with wildflowers. Her knitting needles clicked softly, crafting a pale blue shawl as her mind wandered, not to the stitches, but to the patterns of human nature she so often unraveled. Her invitation to Florence Hall had come unexpectedly, a neatly penned note from Lady Evelyn Harrington, requesting her company for a weekend amid the estate's famed gardens. "A restful escape, Jane," the letter had promised. Miss Marple, with her keen sense for the undercurrents beneath polite words, suspected there might be more to uncover than roses. The train slowed at the village station, a quaint platform where ivy clung to the ticket office, and a blackbird trilled from a nearby oak. A chauffeur in a polished Bentley awaited, his cap tilted respectfully. "Miss Marple?" From the car, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel, and took it all in. "A place of beauty," she said to the chauffeur, who nodded. "Aye, but it takes work to keep it so, miss." Lady Evelyn greeted her at the grand entrance, her lavender dress shimmering against the hall's oak-paneled interior. "Jane, how wonderful you've come," she said, her smile warm but tinged with strain, like a portrait touched up to hide cracks. Her eyes, shadowed despite the daylight, darted briefly to the staircase. "I hope the gardens will inspire you. They're Reginald's pride." Miss Marple inclined her head. "I'm sure they will, Evelyn. There's nothing like nature to reveal truths." The hall buzzed with the hum of preparation. Servants moved with practiced efficiency, polishing silver candelabras and arranging vases of fresh-cut flowers. The scent of baking scones wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the polish of old wood. Miss Marple was shown to a guest room overlooking the gardens, its chintz curtains framing a view of the fountain and the rose beds beyond. She unpacked her knitting bag and a single change of clothes, her simplicity a stark contrast to the opulence around her. From her window she watched a gardener, Thomas Greeley, she'd later learn, pruning a hedge with fierce concentration, his hands gripping the shears as if they were an extension of his will. Downstairs the household was assembling. Arthur Harrington lounged in the drawing room, a magazine open but unread in his lap. His tailored suit and slicked-back hair gave him the air of a matinee idol. But his eyes, when they met Miss Marple's, held a flicker of calculation. "Aunt Evelyn's village friend, I presume," he said, rising with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Arthur Harrington, the wayward nephew. Charmed." Miss Marple returned a polite nod, her needles clicking. "A pleasure, Mr. Harrington. I hear you're fond of fast cars." Arthur's laugh was light, but she noted the way his fingers tightened on the magazine. "Oh, Uncle disapproved." Reference. The gardener's face reddened, his fists clenching as he turned back to his work, the shears snapping with unnecessary force. Miss Marple, observing from the terrace, noted the exchange with interest. Pride wounded is a dangerous thing, she thought, her needles never faltering. Eliza Thorne served tea in the conservatory, her movements deft, but her hands betraying a slight tremble as she poured for Colonel Edmund Blake. The colonel, his face ruddy from years under foreign suns, was regaling the group with tales of India. "Reginald and I, we had grand times in Bombay. Remember that poker game, Reggie? Cost me a pretty penny." His laugh boomed, but his eyes, when they met Sir Reginald's, held a glint of something sharper. Sir Reginald raised his teacup. "Old stories, Edmund, best left buried. Miss Marple sipped her tea, noting the colonel's cufflink, a silver tiger's head, gleaming in the light. As evening approached, the garden party preparations reached their peak. Lanterns were strung along the paths, their glow casting intricate shadows on the lawn. The string quartet tuned their instruments, their notes drifting like petals on the breeze. So Reginald inspected the arrangements, barking orders at the staff while Lady Evelyn hovered nearby, her handkerchief twisted in her hands. Arthur lingered near the fountain, flirting with Eliza as she arranged a tray of champagne flutes. "Careful, Eliza, don't drop those. Uncle's in a mood," he teased, his voice low. Eliza flushed and hurried away, her apron catching on a rose thorn. Miss Marple, seated with her knitting, caught the maid's fleeting glance of distress. Colonel Blake joined Sir Reginald by the fountain, his voice dropping to a murmur. "That old debt, Reggie. Time we settled it, don't you think?" Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. "Nonsense, Edmund. Water under the bridge." The colonel's smile was tight, his hand brushing the tiger cufflink as he turned away. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind filing the moment away like a stitch in a pattern. The party began as dusk settled, the gardens transformed into a fairyland of light and sound. Guests in evening attire. "Perfect night," he said to no one, the smoke curling upward. Miss Marple, preparing for bed, paused at her window. A figure slipped into the shadows near the gazebo, too distant to identify but moving with purpose. "Curious," she murmured, her fingers resting on her knitting. She closed the curtains, but sleep did not come easily. In St. Mary Mead she had learned that beauty often cloaked danger, and Florence Hall, for all its splendor, felt like a stage set for tragedy. Chapter 3. The Garden Party. The gardens of Florence Hall glowed under the twilight sky, transformed into a dreamlike stage for Sir Reginald Harrington's grand party. Lanterns hung like fireflies along the winding paths, casting golden pools of light on the manicured lawns and vibrant flower beds. The marble fountain at the garden's heart murmured softly, its water catching the reflections of stars above. The string quartet, positioned near the rose arbor, filled the air with strains of Vivaldi, their notes weaving through the hum of conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. Guests in evening attire drifted across the grounds, women in beaded gowns that shimmered like moonlight, men in crisp tails exuding the confidence of wealth. Yet, beneath this polished veneer, Miss Jane Marple sensed a discord, like a sour note in an otherwise perfect melody. Miss Marple had chosen a modest vantage point, a wrought-iron bench near the edge of the lawn, her knitting bag at her side and her needles clicking rhythmically. Her simple black dress and shawl rendered her nearly invisible among the glittering crowd, but her blue eyes, sharp as ever, missed nothing. She observed the guests with the quiet curiosity of one who had unraveled many a village scandal. "People are the same everywhere," she thought, her fingers pausing briefly on a stitch. "Pride, envy, love. They bloom in grand estates as surely as in St. Mary Mead." Sir Reginald held court near the fountain, his broad frame dominating the scene. His voice boomed over the quartet as he recounted a tale from a recent safari in Africa. "Shot the lion clean through the heart." "No." Miss Marple's needles clicked as she replied, "They're lovely, Evelyn. But pride can be a dangerous thing. It often precedes a fall." Lady Evelyn's smile wavered, and she drifted away, her handkerchief now a crumpled knot. Arthur Harrington, ever the charmer, moved through the party like a fox among hens. His tailored suit gleamed under the lanterns, and his smile disarmed even the sternest matrons. He lingered near the refreshment table, where Eliza Thorne was arranging trays of crystal flutes. "Careful, Eliza," he teased, leaning close as she poured champagne. "Wouldn't want to spill on that pretty apron." Eliza's cheeks flushed, and she stepped back, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted a tray. Miss Marple, watching from her bench, noted the maid's torn apron hem, snagged on a rose thorn perhaps, and Arthur's lingering gaze, which held more calculation than flirtation. Thomas Greeley, the gardener, was a shadow at the edges of the party. Tasked with trimming errant vines, he moved among the hedges with a pair of shears that glinted ominously in the lantern light. His broad shoulders were hunched, his face set in a scowl as he worked. Earlier, Miss Marple had overheard him muttering to a footman about Sir Reginald's accusation of theft. "Calls me a thief over a few bulbs, after all I've done for this garden." His voice had carried a raw edge, and now as he clipped a wayward branch, his movements were sharp, almost violent. Miss Marple's needles slowed as she watched him disappear behind a hedge, his shears catching the light like a blade. Colonel Edmund Blake, resplendent in a dinner jacket adorned with military pins, was in high spirits, his laughter booming across the lawn. He cornered Sir Reginald near a cluster of delphiniums, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Reggie, old boy, remember that night in Bombay? Cards, whiskey, and that blasted bet." His tone was jovial, but his eyes, when they met Sir Reginald's, held a glint of steel. "Cost me dearly, that game." Sir Reginald weighed valise never far from his side. He declined to dance, instead scribbling notes in a small leather-bound book, his pen moving with the precision of a surgeon. When a guest, a local squire, asked about his business with Sir Reginald, Lang's reply was curt. "Matters of profit, sir, not pleasure." Miss Marple, knitting quietly, wondered what numbers in those ledgers could provoke such tension. The air grew cooler as midnight approached, and the crowd began to thin. Guests drifted back to the hall, their voices fading into the night. Sir Reginald lingered by the fountain, his cigar glowing like a beacon. He seemed lost in thought, his broad shoulders slumping slightly as he gazed at the water's play. "A perfect night," he said to a passing footman, who nodded and scurried off. Miss Marple, preparing to retire, paused to take in the scene one last time. The lanterns flickered, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the lawn. She spotted a figure moving near the gazebo. Greeley, perhaps, or someone else. But the distance and dim light obscured their identity. Inside the hall, the servants were clearing away glasses, their movements swift but subdued. Eliza, passing Miss Marple in the corridor, offered a shy smile but avoided her gaze. Lady Evelyn, overseeing the staff, looked pale, her handkerchief now a tattered remnant. Arthur was nowhere to be seen, though the rumble of his Daimler starting up echoed faintly from the drive. Colonel Blake, whiskey in hand, was regaling a footman with another tale of India, his voice too loud for the quieting house. Mr. Lang had retired to his room, his valise clutched like a shield. Miss Marple ascended the grand staircase, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. At her window, she paused to look out over the gardens. The fountain gleamed under the moon, its water a silver mirror. A shadow moved again near the gazebo, swift and purposeful, before vanishing into the hedges. "Curious," Miss Marple murmured, her fingers tracing the edge of her shawl. hold its breath, as if unaware of the horror about to shatter its tranquility. Miss Jane Marple, an early riser by habit, was already awake, her knitting needles clicking softly as she sat by her window, watching the first light touch the flower beds. She had sensed an undercurrent last night at the garden party, a discord beneath the laughter. And now, as the world stirred, she felt a prickle of unease, like a dropped stitch in her shawl. The scream came at precisely 6:30, a sharp, piercing cry that cut through the morning calm like a shard of glass. It echoed from the garden, near the central fountain, and was followed by a second, more desperate wail. Miss Marple's needles paused, her blue eyes sharpening as she rose, slipping on her cardigan. She moved swiftly for her age, descending the grand staircase to find the household stirring in confusion. Servants peered from doorways, their faces pale, while Lady Evelyn Harrington, still in her nightgown, hurried toward the source of the sound, her hair loose and her eyes wide with dread. The scene awaited in the heart of the garden, where the fountain's marble cherubs gazed impassively. Eliza Thorne, the young maid, stood frozen by the water's edge, her apron clutched in trembling hands, her face drained of color. "Oh God, no," she gasped, her voice breaking as she pointed to the shallow pool. There, face down in the rippling water, lay Sir Reginald Harrington, his broad frame unnaturally still. His tailored coat was sodden, clinging to his body, and a dark, ominous stain spread from his head, tinging the water a sickly crimson. A deep wound marred the back of his skull, as if struck by a heavy, blunt object. The sight was grotesque against the garden's beauty, a brutal intrusion into the morning's peace. Lady Evelyn reached the fountain and collapsed to her knees, a choked sob escaping her. "Reginald! Oh my God, Reginald!" Her hands hovered over the water, as if afraid to touch him, her lavender nightgown pooling on the grass. Arthur Harrington appeared moments later, his face ashen as he supported his aunt, knitting bag tucked under her arm. Her gaze swept the scene, noting every detail: the locked garden gate, its heavy iron undisturbed, the dew-kissed grass, unmarred by footprints save for Sir Reginald's own, leading to the fountain, the broken stem of a crimson rose lying near the body, its petals crushed, and a faint, lingering scent of cigar smoke, despite the morning breeze. She knelt subtly, her fingers brushing the grass, and noticed a small smear of mud near the fountain's base. Not enough to be a footprint, but enough to catch her eye. The local constable, a ruddy-faced man named Perkins, arrived within the hour, his bicycle wobbling up the drive. He was followed by Inspector Craddock from Scotland Yard, summoned by a frantic telephone call from Lady Evelyn. Craddock, a wiry man with a sharp jaw and sharper mind, surveyed the scene with professional calm. "Murder, no doubt," he declared, crouching by the body. "Blunt force to the head, likely instantaneous. But how? The garden gate was locked, the keys in his pocket, and there's no sign of entry or exit." He gestured to the high stone walls encircling the garden, their ivy undisturbed. "It's impossible, unless the killer had wings." The household gathered on the lawn, their faces a tableau of grief, fear, and suspicion. Lady Evelyn, now wrapped in a shawl, wept softly, supported by a trembling Eliza. Arthur paced, his hands thrust into his pockets, his eyes darting between the body and the gate. Lang stood apart, scribbling furiously, his expression unreadable. Greeley muttered under his breath, his rake now propped against a hedge, while Colonel Blake clenched his fists, his tiger's head cufflink glinting as he muttered, "Damned tragedy, this." Inspector Craddock began his initial inquiries, his notebook open as he questioned the group. "When was Sir Reginald last seen alive?" he asked, his pen poised. Lady Evelyn, her voice quavering, replied, "At the garden party, just before midnight. He was by the fountain smoking his cigar. I Colonel's missing cufflink, the mate to the one glinting on his sleeve. She also recalled the shadow she'd seen near the gazebo last night, too fleeting to identify, but deliberate in its movement." Craddock puzzled over the locked gate, pacing the garden's perimeter. No ladders, no signs of climbing. The walls are 12 feet high, and the gate's bolts are rusted shut except for this one, locked with the key in his pocket. He shook his head. "It's a proper locked room mystery, this is." He ordered the body removed for examination, the constables carefully lifting Sir Reginald from the water, revealing a small bloodied stone beneath him, part of the fountain's decorative edging, but too light to have caused the wound. Miss Marple's mind worked like her knitting, stitching together observations. The broken rose stems suggested a struggle, but the lack of footprints puzzled her. The cigar smoke, faint but distinct, hinted at Sir Reginald's final moments, yet no cigar butt was found. The mud smear near the fountain was curious, too small for a shoe, but perhaps from a tool or a knee. She glanced at the gazebo, half hidden by a hedge, and wondered about the shadow she'd seen. In St. Mary Mead, she thought, the simplest things often hide the deepest truths. As the household dispersed, Lady Evelyn retreating to her room in tears, Arthur muttering about calling the family solicitor, and Lang scribbling notes, Miss Marple lingered by the fountain. She bent to examine the rose stem, noting a faint trace of sap on its thorns, as if it had been snapped in haste. "Someone was here," she murmured, her eyes scanning the garden. The fountain's gentle splash seemed to mock the tragedy, its water now clear of blood but heavy with secrets. Inspector Craddock approached her, his expression weary. "Miss Marple, you've a reputation for noticing things. Any thoughts on this impossibility?" She smiled faintly, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Only that impossibilities, Inspector, are often a matter of perspective. Like a knot in one's knitting, it looks tangled until you find the right thread." Craddock raised an eyebrow but nodded, sensing to dispel the chill that had settled over the estate. The gardens, once a haven of beauty, now felt like a stage where tragedy had played its opening act. The fountain, cleansed of Sir Reginald Harrington's blood, sparkled innocently, its gentle splash a mocking contrast to the horror it had witnessed. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing-room with her knitting bag at her side, watched the household through her mild blue eyes, her needles clicking a steady rhythm. The murder of Sir Reginald, a blow to the head in a locked garden with no trace of entry or exit, had set tongues wagging and suspicions flaring. Inspector Craddock, newly arrived from Scotland Yard, was determined to untangle this impossible crime. But Miss Marple knew that truth often hid in the smallest details, like a dropped stitch in a pattern. The drawing-room, with its heavy velvet curtains and polished mahogany, was now a makeshift interrogation chamber. Inspector Craddock stood by the fireplace, his wiry frame taut with focus, his notebook open as he addressed the assembled household. Lady Evelyn Harrington sat on a settee, her face pale beneath a veil of grief, her hands clutching a crumpled handkerchief. Arthur Harrington leaned against a bookcase, his usual charm subdued, his eyes flickering with unease. Mr. Victor Lang perched on a chair, his valise at his feet, his sharp features set in a mask of calm. Thomas Greeley, the gardener, stood awkwardly near the door, his soil-stained hands clasped tightly. Eliza Thorne, the maid, hovered near a tea tray, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins, her apron still torn from the night before. Colonel Edmund Blake paced by the window, his military bluster muted. One cufflink, a silver tiger's head glinting in the light, the other conspicuously absent. Craddock's voice was crisp as he began. Sir Reginald was killed between 11 and midnight, struck from behind with a heavy object. The garden gate was locked, the key in his pocket, and no footprints marred the grass. We're dealing with a murderer among us. His eyes swept the room, lingering on each face, damp, though the night had been dry. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Mud from where? In a garden untouched by rain. Mr. Lang's response was precise, almost mechanical. I was in my room by 11, reviewing accounts. Sir Reginald owed me thousands. Discrepancies in our spice trade ledgers. He accused me of falsifying them, but I have proof of my innocence. He patted his valise, his fingers steady. Miss Marple noted his alibi's exactness, as if rehearsed, and the faint ink stain on his cuff, suggesting late-night scribbling. Greeley shifted uncomfortably, his rough hands twisting. Sir Reginald sacked me yesterday, called me a thief over some tulip bulbs I planted myself. I was trimming hedges till late, didn't see him after the party started. His rake, propped outside, had a suspiciously clean handle for a tool used so recently. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind filing away the detail. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. I was clearing glasses at the party. Sir Reginald. He made advances earlier that day. I refused, and he said I'd regret it, that my job was at stake. Her torn apron trembled in her hands, and her eyes darted to Arthur, who avoided her gaze. Miss Marple recalled the maid's distress at the party, and the rose thorn caught in her apron, perhaps from a hurried escape. Colonel Blake's bluster returned as he spoke. Reggie and I had an old grudge from India, a card game gone wrong. Cost me a fortune, but I'd not kill over it. I had a whiskey in the library, then bed by 11:30. His missing cufflink nagged at Miss Marple's mind. She'd seen its mate near the fountain, glinting in the grass. A coincidence or something more? Craddock scribbled notes, his brow furrowed. No one admits to seeing Sir Reginald after 11:30, yet he was dead by midnight. The locked gate and lack of footprints make this a devil of a puzzle. He turned to Miss Marple, who had rose stem she'd noticed earlier, its sap still fresh, suggesting it was snapped during the murder. The faint cigar smoke she'd detected lingered in her memory. Sir Reginald's habit. But where was the cigar butt? She knelt by the fountain, her fingers brushing the mud smear she'd seen before. It was small, not a footprint, but perhaps from a knee or a tool. A clue overlooked in the chaos. Her eyes drifted to the gazebo, half hidden by a hedge, where she'd seen a shadow move last night. Someone was here, she thought, and they knew the garden well. Back in the drawing room, whispers among the servants added to the tension. A footman claimed to have seen Arthur's Daimler start up near midnight, its engine rumbling briefly before falling silent. Another swore they'd heard a muffled argument from the garden, though no one could pinpoint the voices. Lady Evelyn's maid mentioned finding a paintbrush in the gazebo, its bristles wet with crimson, though Lady Evelyn hadn't painted since the party. Miss Marple filed these away, her mind weaving connections like threads in her shawl. Craddock interviewed the servants next, their stories consistent but vague. Eliza admitted to lingering near the fountain to collect glasses, but insisted she'd seen nothing unusual. Greeley's alibi of hedge trimming held, but his resentment toward Sir Reginald was palpable. "He called me a thief after 20 years of service," he growled, his fists clenching. Miss Marple noted his shears, propped nearby, their blades gleaming as if freshly cleaned. The colonel's bluster faltered under Craddock's questioning. "I've no reason to kill Reggie," he insisted, but his hand strayed to his lone cufflink, as if its absence weighed on him. Arthur's muddied shoes drew Craddock's attention, but he brushed it off. "I took a walk to clear my head. Gardens are muddy, aren't they?" Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. Mud in a dry garden was no small matter. Lang's calm demeanor cracked slightly when pressed about the ledgers, his frustration evident. "This case is a maze, Miss Marple. No weapon, no entry, no exit. What do you make of it?" She folded her knitting, her smile gentle. "Mazes have exits, Inspector, if you know where to look. It's the human heart that's the real puzzle." As he walked away, she resumed her needles, her mind stitching together the clues. The murder of Sir Reginald was no random act. It was rooted in the passions and grudges of Florence Hall, and Miss Marple was determined to unearth them. Chapter 6. Clues and Red Herrings. The sun hung high over Florence Hall, its light filtering through the drawing room's heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath after Sir Reginald Harrington's murder. The locked garden, the bloodied fountain, the impossible crime. It all weighed on the household like a storm cloud refusing to break. Miss Jane Marple sat in a corner armchair, her knitting needles clicking a steady rhythm, her mild blue eyes scanning the room. Inspector Craddock paced by the fireplace, his notebook brimming with questions, while the suspects, Lady Evelyn, Arthur, Mr. Lang, Greeley, Eliza, and Colonel Blake, shifted uneasily, their faces a mosaic of grief, fear, and guarded secrets. Craddock's investigation had intensified, his questions sharper as he sought to pierce the veil of alibis. "We've a murderer among us," he said, his voice cutting through the room's silence. "The weapon's missing, the garden was locked, and yet Sir Reginald lies dead. Someone knows more than they're saying." His eyes lingered on each suspect, but Miss Marple, knitting quietly, was already piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. Mud smears, broken roses, missing cufflinks, each a thread in a pattern only she could see. The morning brought a flurry of discoveries, each one a potential clue or a cunning misdirection. A footman clearing the rose bushes near the fountain unearthed a bloodied garden trowel, its blade in his room, held firm, backed by a maid who'd seen him through a crack in the door. Miss Marple's needles slowed. The letter felt too convenient, a distraction planted to muddy the waters. Lady Evelyn's maid, tidying the mistress's room, found a diary hidden beneath a pillow. Its pages detailed marital strife and hinted at an affair, But the entry stopped abruptly 2 days before the murder. She was heartbroken, the maid whispered to Craddock, but she'd never kill. The diary's final page mentioned a late-night walk in the garden, contradicting Lady Evelyn's claim of retiring early. When questioned, Lady Evelyn flushed, her handkerchief twisting. "I wrote in distress, Inspector. I walked to clear my mind, nothing more." Miss Marple noted the paint stains on her fingers, now faded but still present, and wondered about the gazebo's crimson-tipped paintbrush. Arthur's behavior raised eyebrows when a groundskeeper reported scratches on his Daimler, fresh and deep, as if from a hedge or low wall. "I drove to the village for a nightcap," Arthur said, his charm strained. "Brushed a hedge on the way back." But the village pub's landlord, questioned by Craddock's constables, swore Arthur hadn't been there. Miss Marple recalled the mud on his shoes, fresh despite a dry night, and the rumble of his car near midnight. "A drive with no destination," she mused, her needles clicking faster. Eliza Thorne, under Craddock's gentle but firm questioning, admitted to a secret meeting with Sir Reginald in the garden before the party. "He wanted to talk. Privately," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "I refused his advances again and he was angry. But I left him alive." Her torn apron, now mended with clumsy stitches, suggested a struggle, or a hasty retreat through thorns. Miss Marple's mind lingered on the rose stem by the fountain, its sap fresh as if snapped in haste. Colonel Blake's war medal, a heavy bronze piece from his India days, was found near the fountain, half buried in the grass. "Must have fallen off," he blustered, but his missing cufflink, to someone familiar with the estate's layout. She recalled the shadows she'd seen from her window, slipping toward the gazebo. Not so impossible after all, she thought. Back in the drawing room, a second scream disrupted the tense quiet. A housemaid, cleaning Lady Evelyn's room, had found a small vial labeled poison tucked in a drawer. Craddock examined it, his brow furrowing. Empty, and the labels fresh. Too fresh. Chemical tests later revealed it contained only water, a clumsy attempt at misdirection. Lady Evelyn, horrified, swore she'd never seen it. "Someone's trying to ruin me," she cried, her composure crumbling. Miss Marple's needles paused. The vial was a red herring, but its placement suggested a desperate hand. Craddock gathered the suspects again, his frustration mounting. "We've a trowel, a letter, a diary, a medal, and now a fake poison vial. Someone's playing games, but murder's no game." His eyes scanned the room, lingering on Greeley's scowl, Lang's calm facade, and Arthur's fidgeting hands. Miss Marple, knitting quietly, noted the dynamics. Lady Evelyn's trembling, Eliza's averted gaze, Blake's forced bluster. Each clue pointed in multiple directions, like a maze with false exits. She wandered the garden again, her mind stitching together observations. The trowel, wiped clean but bloodied, suggested a setup. Greeley's anger made him an easy target. The forged letter against Lang was too neat, its ink too fresh. The diary's entries felt staged, their drama exaggerated. Arthur's scratched car and muddy shoes hinted at a midnight errand. But to where? Eliza's torn apron and secret meeting suggested fear, not guilt. The Colonel's medal and cufflink were too conveniently placed. Yet the cufflink's proximity to the body was no accident. The hidden path behind the gazebo, however, was the key, a thread that could unravel the locked room puzzle. As evening fell, the household grew restless, confined by Craddock's orders. Whispers circulated. A servant swore they'd seen a cigar. Stars emerged. Florence Hall stood silent, its gardens cloaked in shadow. Miss Marple's knitting continued, each stitch a step closer to the truth. The murder of Sir Reginald was no random act. It was rooted in the passions and grudges of the estate, and the clues, true and false, were beginning to form a pattern only she could see. Chapter 7. Complications and Twists. The afternoon sky over Florence Hall darkened with gathering clouds, as if the heavens themselves mirrored the growing unease within the estate. The gardens, once a vibrant tapestry of roses and lilies, now seemed to whisper of secrets, their beauty marred by the memory of Sir Reginald Harrington's bloodied body in the fountain. The locked room mystery, his death in a sealed garden with no footprints but his own, had baffled Inspector Craddock and set the household on edge. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing room with her knitting bag at her side, worked her needles with steady precision, her mild blue eyes missing nothing. The clues, trowels, letters, medals, and shadows, were piling up, but so were the complications, each one tightening the knot of this deadly puzzle. Inspector Craddock, his wiry frame taut with frustration, gathered the suspects once more in the oak-paneled drawing room. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and nervous anticipation. Lady Evelyn sat rigidly, her lavender dress replaced by somber gray, her handkerchief now a tattered relic. Arthur Harrington slouched against a bookcase, his charm fraying under the weight of scrutiny. Mr. Victor Lang, his valise ever present, maintained a cool facade, though his fingers tapped restlessly. Thomas Greeley, the gardener, stood near the door, his soil-stained hands clenched, his scowl deepening. Eliza Thorne, the maid, hovered by a tea tray, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her torn apron now mended with uneven stitches. Colonel Edmund Blake paced by the window, his lone tiger's head cufflink glinting, his bluster subdued by the mounting evidence. The estate for 2 hours, claiming he'd gone for a walk to clear his head. He returned disheveled, his jacket torn and his shoes caked with fresh mud, despite the dry afternoon. When Craddock pressed him, Arthur's story wavered. "I wandered the grounds, lost track of time," he said, avoiding eye contact. Miss Marple noted the scratches on his Daimler, now deeper, and the faint scent of petrol on his hands. A walk that leaves such marks, she thought, her needles resuming their rhythm. A startling twist came from Eliza Thorne, who, under Craddock's gentle probing, broke down in tears. "I wasn't honest before," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Sir Reginald, he was my father. I'm his illegitimate daughter, born to a housemaid years ago. I came to Florence Hall to seek recognition, not to kill him." She produced a locket from her pocket, its worn silver revealing a faded photograph of a younger Sir Reginald. Craddock examined it, his brow furrowing. "Why hide this, Miss Thorne?" Eliza's eyes dropped. "I feared no one would believe me. He refused to acknowledge me, threatened to dismiss me if I spoke." Miss Marple's gaze softened. Eliza's motive was heartbreak, not murder. But her secret meeting in the garden now carried new weight. Mr. Lang's composure cracked when Craddock presented the forged letter accusing him of embezzlement. A deeper search of Sir Reginald's study revealed a second set of ledgers, hidden in a locked drawer, showing discrepancies traced to Arthur's gambling debts. "You doctored these to frame me," Lang snapped, his eyes blazing at Arthur, who paled. "I needed funds, yes, but I didn't forge anything. Miss Marple noted Lang's ink-stained cuff, now smudged with fresh blue, and Arthur's nervous fidgeting. The ledgers were a tangle of truth and lies. But whose? Lady Evelyn's fragile state unraveled further when a housemaid found a crumpled note in her wastebasket, written in Sir Reginald's hand. "I cannot go on. Forgive me." It hinted at suicide, but the coroner's report confirmed murder, the wound's angle impossible for self-infliction. Craddock confronted Lady. Evening approached. Miss Marple returned to the garden, her steps slow but purposeful. The hidden path behind the gazebo called to her, and she examined the low gate again, its hinges oiled despite their rusted appearance. She pushed it gently, revealing a narrow trail leading to the estate's outer wall, where a concealed lever, part of the fountain's old irrigation system, allowed silent entry. "Not so locked after all," she murmured, her fingers tracing the lever's smooth edge. The shadow she'd seen from her window likely used this path, known only to someone intimate with the estate's secrets. Back in the drawing room, tensions flared. Arthur confronted Lang, accusing him of planting the forged ledgers. "You wanted Uncle's share of the business," he snapped. Lang's retort was icy. "And you wanted his fortune to pay your debts." The argument escalated until Colonel Blake intervened, his voice booming. "Enough. We're all under suspicion." Miss Marple, knitting quietly, noted the dynamics. Arthur's desperation, Lang's calculated calm, Blake's defensive bluster. A new clue surfaced when a servant reported finding a cigar stub near the gazebo, its tip smudged with faint lipstick, Lady Evelyn's shade of rose. When questioned, she paled. "I smoked with Reginald sometimes, but not last night." Her denial rang hollow, and Miss Marple recalled the cigar smoke she'd detected by the fountain. The stub was gone by the time Craddock searched, suggesting someone had removed it. A clue erased, she thought. But by whom? Greeley, released on bail due to lack of conclusive evidence, returned to the estate, his anger simmering. Miss Marple overheard him muttering to a groundskeeper about planting evidence to clear his name. Perhaps the war medal? His shears, now in police custody, bore no blood, but their blades were freshly sharpened, as if to obscure past use. As night fell, the household gathered for a tense dinner, the clink of silverware sharp in the silence. Craddock presented a timeline. Sir Reginald died at midnight, his body undisturbed until Eliza's scream at dawn. Alan lies. The killers covered their tracks well. She folded her knitting, her smile gentle. Tracks can be hidden, Inspector, but roots cannot. Look to what connects them all. The garden, and the passions it hides. As he nodded, she resumed her needles, her mind tracing the hidden path to the truth. The rain began to fall, drumming on Florence Hall's windows. The mystery had grown thorns, but Miss Marple knew that even the most tangled garden could be tamed with patience and a sharp eye. Chapter 8. Deepening Suspicions. The rain lashed Florence Hall with relentless fury, its rhythm a somber drumbeat against the estate's tall windows. The gardens, once a vibrant Eden, now glistened under a gray shroud, their roses drooping as if mourning Sir Reginald Harrington's brutal end. The locked room mystery, his body found in the fountain, the garden sealed, no footprints but his own, had tightened its grip on the household, each suspect ensnared in a tangle of motives and half-truths. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing room with her knitting bag at her side, worked her needles with quiet precision, her blue eyes scanning the faces around her. The clues, trowels, letters, medals, cigar stubs, were mounting. But so were the suspicions, each one a thorn in the unfolding puzzle. Inspector Craddock, his wiry frame taut with determination, had transformed the drawing room into a nerve center of inquiry. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and polished wood, undercut by the nervous tension of the assembled. Lady Evelyn Harrington sat rigidly, her gray dress a stark contrast to her usual lavender, her eyes red-rimmed but wary. Arthur Harrington leaned against the mantel, his charm eroded by unease, his fingers drumming restlessly. Mr. Victor Lang, his valise a constant shadow, maintained a veneer of calm, though his sharp eyes darted to every sound. Thomas Greeley, released on bail but still glowering, stood near the door, his hands clasped to hide their trembling. Eliza Thorne, the maid, busied herself with a tea tray, her mended apron crisp, but her movements jittery. Quarters to clarify her story. In a tearful confession, Eliza produced the silver locket again, its faded photograph of Sir Reginald gleaming in the dim light. "He was my father, Miss Marple," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I only wanted his acknowledgement, not his death." She revealed a letter, hidden in her mattress, written by her mother years ago, confirming her parentage. The letter mentions Sir Reginald's promise to provide for her, broken when he refused to recognize her publicly. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but she noted Eliza's trembling hands. Fear, not guilt, she suspected. "Truth is a heavy burden, my dear," she said gently, filing the locket's significance alongside the rose stem by the fountain. In the library, tensions erupted when Arthur confronted Mr. Lang over the forged ledgers. "You framed me to cover your own theft," Arthur snapped, his face flushed as he jabbed a finger at Lang's valise. Lang's retort was icy. "Your debts are your noose, Harrington, not mine." The argument escalated, books tumbling from a shelf as Arthur lunged, only to be restrained by Colonel Blake, whose booming voice cut through the chaos. "Enough, both of you. This isn't a brawl." Miss Marple, observing from a corner, noted Lang's ink-stained cuff, now smudged with fresh blue, and Arthur's torn jacket, a match for the scratches on his Daimler. Passions run deep, she thought, but they cloud the truth. A new clue surfaced when a groundskeeper, clearing debris after the rain, found a pair of gloves near the garden wall, caked with mud and a faint trace of blood. Craddock examined them, noting their fine leather and monogrammed initials, VL. "Mr. Lang, care to explain?" he demanded. Lang's composure wavered, his eyes narrowing. "Those aren't mine. I don't wear gloves in summer." A servant confirmed seeing Lang near the wall the previous evening, but Lang insisted he was in his room, his alibi backed by his ever-present valise. Miss Marple's needles slowed. The gloves felt like another plant, but the blood trace was troubling. Real or trembling? "I smoked with Reginald sometimes, but not last night. Someone's using my things to torment me." Miss Marple noted the cigar's absence from the fountain where she'd smelled smoke, and the lipstick shade, identical to Lady Evelyn's but freshly applied, as if staged. A clever touch, she thought, but too deliberate. Colonel Blake's temper flared when Craddock pressed him about the war medal and missing cufflink. "I told you the medal fell off, and the cufflink, someone's planting evidence." His bluster faltered when a servant recalled seeing him near the gazebo after the party, adjusting his sleeve. Miss Marple's mind lingered on the cufflink by the fountain, its placement too perfect, but its mate on Blake's wrist was undeniable. A thread worth pulling, she mused, her needles clicking faster. As evening fell, Miss Marple returned to the garden, the rain now a drizzle that softened the paths. She traced the hidden trail behind the gazebo, her fingers brushing the concealed lever in the fountain's irrigation system. It clicked smoothly, opening the low gate with barely a sound. The locked room unravels, she thought, but the killer's identity remained elusive. The mud smear, the rose stem, the cigar smoke, they pointed to someone who knew the garden's secrets. But who? Back in the drawing room, Craddock gathered the suspects, his notebook bulging with contradictions. The gloves, the cigar stub, the ledgers. Someone's orchestrating a charade, he said, his eyes scanning the room. Arthur's fidgeting, Lang's icy calm, Eliza's trembling, Blake's bluster, Lady Evelyn's tears. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the pattern was incomplete. Miss Marple, knitting quietly, saw the connections. The gloves linked to Lang, the cigar to Lady Evelyn, the medal to Blake, the trowel to Greeley, the ledgers to Arthur, the locket to Eliza. Yet the hidden path tied them all to the garden. A servant's whisper added a new twist. A groundskeeper had seen a figure near the fountain after midnight, cloaked in shadow, carrying something heavy. The description was vague, male or female, tall or short, but it matched the shadow Miss Marple. This case is a tangle of half-truths. The killers covered their tracks, but not perfectly. She folded her knitting, her smile gentle. Tracks can be hidden, Inspector, but motives cannot. Look to the garden. It holds the key. As he nodded, she resumed her needles, her mind tracing the hidden path, the cigar's lipstick, the bloodied gloves. The truth was close, but the thorns of deception were sharp. The rain slowed, leaving Florence Hall cloaked in mist. The mystery had deepened, its roots twisting through the hearts of those within, and Miss Marple knew the next revelation would bring her closer to the killer's shadow. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The rain had ceased, but a heavy mist clung to Florence Hall, shrouding its gardens in a ghostly veil. The roses, once vibrant, drooped under the weight of dew, their petals mirroring the somber mood within the estate. Sir Reginald Harrington's murder. A brutal blow in a locked garden, with no footprints but his own, had cast a pall over the household, each suspect ensnared in a tangle of motives and misdirection. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing room with her knitting bag at her side, worked her needles with quiet precision, her blue eyes scanning the faces around her. The clues, trowels, ledgers, cigar stubs, hidden paths were piling up. But the truth remained elusive, like a shadow flitting through the mist. Inspector Craddock, his wiry frame taut with resolve, stood before the assembled suspects, his notebook brimming with contradictions. The drawing room's heavy curtains muffled the world outside, but the tension within was sharp as a blade. Lady Evelyn Harrington sat stiffly, her gray dress a stark contrast to her usual elegance, her eyes darting nervously. Arthur Harrington leaned against a bookcase, his charm eroded by a restless unease, his fingers twitching. Mr. Victor Lang, his valise ever present, maintained a cool facade, though his sharp gaze betrayed calculation. Thomas Greeley, back from his brief arrest, glowered near the door, his hands clasped to hide, pieced together from servant whispers and forensic details. Sir Reginald died at midnight, struck from behind with a heavy object, likely a tool heavier than the bloodied trowel. The locked gate, the key in his pocket, and the pristine grass remained a puzzle, but the hidden path Miss Marple had found offered a clue to the impossible entry. Someone knew this estate's secrets, Craddock said, his gaze sharp. And someone's alibis are crumbling. Arthur's story unraveled first. A footman reported hearing his Daimler's engine near midnight, and a groundskeeper confirmed its headlights near the outer wall. When pressed, Arthur's charm faltered. "I drove to clear my head, that's all," he snapped. But his watch, stopped at 11:45, drew Craddock's scrutiny. "Tampered with, or broken in a struggle?" The inspector mused, noting the mud on Arthur's shoes, now caked with a mix of garden soil and gravel from the drive. Miss Marple's needles slowed. The watch was a curious detail, suggesting Arthur was near the fountain at the critical hour. Mr. Lang's calm facade cracked when Craddock produced the bloodied gloves, monogrammed with his initials. Chemical tests confirmed the blood was Sir Reginald's, though the mud matched the garden soil, not the fountain's edge. "I told you, they're not mine," Lang insisted, his voice rising. A servant's testimony placed him near the garden wall, but his alibi, working late on accounts, held, backed by a maid's sighting. Miss Marple noted the ink smudges on his cuff, now layered with blue and black as if he'd been writing frantically. A man so precise, she thought, yet caught in a messy web. Lady Evelyn's lipstick-smudged cigar stub drew renewed attention. A housemaid cleaning the gazebo found a second stub, its rose hue identical to Lady Evelyn's lipstick. "I didn't smoke that night," she protested, her hands trembling. Craddock's tests confirmed the lipstick was hers, but the stub's freshness suggested recent use. Miss Marple recalled the faint cigar smoke by the fountain, now vanished, and the torn apron, mended but frayed, suggested a struggle, but her grief seemed genuine. Miss Marple noted the rose thorn caught in the fabric, matching the broken stem by the fountain. A daughter scorned, she thought. But a killer? Colonel Blake's bluster faltered when Craddock pressed him about the cufflink and war medal. "I was in the library, drinking," he insisted, but a servant recalled seeing him near the gazebo, adjusting his sleeve. The missing cufflink found by the fountain was undeniable, its tiger's head mate gleaming on his wrist. "Someone's framing me!" Blake roared, his hand straying to the lone cufflink. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. The cufflink was no accident, but its placement felt staged. As night fell, a storm knocked out the estate's power, plunging the drawing room into darkness. The sudden blackout sparked chaos, glasses clinked, footsteps shuffled, and a muffled cry echoed from the hall. When the lights flickered back, a window was open, its curtains fluttering. Craddock's men searched the grounds, finding a discarded scarf near the gazebo, embroidered with Lady Evelyn's initials. "I was in my room," she cried. But her paint-stained fingers trembled. Miss Marple's mind raced. The scarf, like the cigar stub, felt too convenient. Another red herring. A groundskeeper's report added a new twist. A figure had been seen slipping toward the fountain in the dark, carrying something heavy. The shadow matched Miss Marple's memory from her window, moving with purpose along the hidden path. Someone who knew the gate, she thought, her needles pausing. She revisited the gazebo, finding a faint scratch on the fountain's lever, as if forced recently. The hidden path, she realized, was the key to the locked room, but the killer's motive remained buried. Back in the drawing room, Craddock presented the timeline again. Sir Reginald's death at midnight. Gentle. Mazes have exits, Inspector, and fools reveal themselves. The garden's secrets will speak if we listen. As he nodded, she resumed her needles, her mind tracing the hidden path, the bloodied gloves, the cigar's lipstick. The storm was gathering, and the truth was close, its shadow looming over Florence Hall. Chapter 10. The Revelation. The mist had lifted from Florence Hall, but a heavy silence clung to the estate, as if the very walls awaited the truth. The gardens, their roses now wilting under the weight of recent rains, seemed to hold their breath, their beauty marred by the memory of Sir Reginald Harrington's bloodied body in the fountain. The locked room mystery, his death in a sealed garden, with no footprints but his own, had baffled Inspector Craddock and ensnared the household in a tangle of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing room with her knitting bag at her side, worked her needles with quiet precision, her blue eyes gleaming with the clarity of a puzzle nearly solved. The clues, trowels, ledgers, cigar stubs, hidden paths, bloodied gloves, had formed a pattern. And now, as evening settled over the estate, she was ready to unravel it. Inspector Craddock gathered the suspects in the drawing room, its oak-paneled walls and heavy curtains lending a somber weight to the moment. Lady Evelyn Harrington sat on a settee, her gray dress stark, her hands clutching a frayed handkerchief. Arthur Harrington leaned against the mantel, his charm replaced by a tense pallor, his fingers twitching. Mr. Victor Lang, his valise at his feet, maintained a cool facade, though his sharp eyes darted nervously. Thomas Greeley, released on bail, stood near the door, his scowl softened by exhaustion. Eliza Thorne, the maid, hovered by a tea tray, her mended apron crisp, but her eyes red-rimmed. Colonel Edmund Blake paced by the window, his lone tiger's head cufflink glinting, his bluster now a hollow echo. Craddock's voice was firm as he addressed them. "The killer is in this room," and system was the key. Someone used it to enter and leave undetected, knowing the estate's secrets. She turned to the clues, her voice slow for emphasis. The bloodied trowel, found in the rose bushes, pointed to Mr. Greeley, but its clean handle suggested a plant. The forged letter accusing Mr. Lang was too neat, its ink too fresh. The diary hinting at Lady Evelyn's affair, the fake poison vial, the war medal near the fountain, all were red herrings, meant to confuse. But the mud smear by the fountain, the broken rose stem, the missing cigar butt, and the tiger's head cufflink were true threads, pointing to the killer. Lady Evelyn gasped, her handkerchief dropping. "But who, Miss Marple? Who would do this?" Arthur's eyes narrowed, Lang's fingers tightened on his valise. Greeley's scowl deepened, Eliza trembled, and Blake stopped pacing, his face paling. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Colonel Blake. "It was you, Colonel. You killed Sir Reginald, using the hidden path you knew from your days in India with him." A murmur rippled through the room, Blake's face reddening. "Nonsense! I was in the library!" he roared, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice unwavering. "The motive was not the card game from Bombay, as you claimed," she continued. "That was a distraction, like so many clues here. In India, you and Sir Reginald served together, and he knew a secret, a war crime you committed, a village burned under your orders. He blackmailed you for years, threatening exposure unless you paid. His recent financial troubles, as Mr. Lang's ledgers showed, made him press harder. You couldn't pay, so you killed him to silence him. Blake's bluster faltered, his hand straying to his cufflink. You've no proof, he snapped. But Miss Marple pressed on. The cufflink by the fountain, its mate on your wrist, places you at the scene. You lost it in the struggle. Unaware it fell. The war medal, planted to look like a clue, was your mistake. Too obvious, meant to shift blame. The mud smear by the fountain matches the gloves found near the wall. Crumpled, his shoulders sagging. You can't prove this, he shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple addressed the red herrings. The trowel was planted to frame Greeley, whose anger made him an easy target. The forged letter, likely Arthur's work, aimed to deflect suspicion onto Lang. The diary and poison vial were desperate attempts to implicate Lady Evelyn, perhaps by someone hoping to muddy the waters. The cigar stub with lipstick was a clever touch, but Lady Evelyn's grief was genuine. She smoked with her husband in happier times, not that night. She turned to Eliza. Your locket and your story of seeking recognition were true, my dear. But your meeting with Sir Reginald was no murder. Your torn apron caught on the roses as you fled his rejection. Eliza sobbed, relief mingling with grief. Miss Marple's gaze softened. And Arthur, your midnight drive was to hide your debts, not a body, though your lies didn't help. Mr. Lang, your ledgers exposed Sir Reginald's greed, but you fought with numbers, not weapons. Greeley, your spade was clean, your anger real, but not deadly. Blake lunged forward, his voice a snarl. You're a meddling old woman! But Craddock's constable seized him, his resistance fading as the truth sank in. I couldn't let him ruin me, he muttered, his head bowing. He'd have exposed it all, the village, the lives lost. I paid for years, but he wanted more. I had to end it. Craddock nodded, his notebook closing. Colonel Blake, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Harrington. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelations settling like dust. Lady Evelyn wept quietly. Arthur exhaled. Lang's shoulders relaxed. Greeley grunted, and Eliza clutched her locket, tears streaming. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her voice gentle. Human nature is like a garden, Inspector. It blooms with beauty, but its weeds grow deep. The colonel's pride and fear were his undoing. Craddock